I'm going to introduce the team to you, and then I'm going to just say one more thing. So first of all, Tony Bartlett, Dr. Anthony Bartlett, I should say, changed my life with his writings, his scholarship, and I'm just so delighted that he agreed with his wife Linda to come and visit us here in Australia. And then lo and behold, Mac and Dixie said, oh, we might come too. And Ruben, where's Ruben up the back there, local pastor in LA, said, yes, I think I'll join that little adventure as well, because there was a sense of something happening. So great to have the team here, get to know them, wonderful people. I've spent 2 days with them now and they're just solid gold. I also wanted to say that in a world that is very violent, and we're seeing that more and more at the moment, it's not surprising that our whole perception of everything is somewhat shaped by violence. It's so overwhelming, even our most basic assumptions are actually built on the assumption of violence. And it seems like an ultimate truth. And so it even turns up in the scriptures as if God is violent. But there's a deeper truth at work. It's deeper than the seeming truth of violence, and it's the truth of love and grace. And we know that in part, but we feel the tension because there's so much stuff that seems like God is violent. What we're going to do over the next couple of days is understand how to read the scriptures at two levels. The surface level, where the culture is part of the conversation and the assumptions of the culture, so that we can understand, in a sense, what's going on. But there's also a deeper level that's exposing something far more profound. If we capture that, we'll be able to do that when we look at our relationships, when we look at our culture, when we look at our politics, when we look at our church structures, everywhere. It's like a key to seeing what's what. It's very, very important, I feel. If enough people get it together, we will not fail to change the world. It's that important. Thanks, Tony. Oh, you've got one. Yeah, you better be.
Can you hear me? Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me here, and I mean that not just in a formal way. I feel very thankful that we came all this way, that we made the journey, and it was been very pleasant and eventful, and to be received in Australia in this kind of new space. I never thought I'd come to Australia. It was just too far away and kind of slightly weird, and they always won at the Test cricket when I was a kid, which was really annoying, and didn't enamor me to Australia. But now I feel progressively different, of course. But most of all, I'm thankful because, as David's remarks were saying, we are at something of a turning point in our Christian story, which has been going on for quite a while. I mean, comparatively speaking, 2,000 years is longer. As I like to say, we're further away now from Jesus in the Gospels than the Jews were at the time of Jesus from Abraham. So, the age of Christianity is now older at this moment than Judaism was when Jesus was walking the earth. So we've got our long teeth, as they say, and it's time. It really is time for something different because of the crisis. It is not always and very evident. It's not the same thing over and over again. We are in a new situation. So I feel that this is a bit of a watershed moment and a watershed event. And when I say event, I mean a collective human event, not one particular thing happening. And Christianity and the Christian gospel, the biblical faith, somehow or other stands at the heart of that, stands at the heart of what's happening. And of course, I hope I can explain that as I go, and that becomes more clear to you and apparent to you as we go through. But the idea of a watershed for Christians is also something, it's a grand idea, but it's also something very intensely personal. It belongs to each of us, because it can't happen unless each of us embraces it. And of course, to be here this morning is a halfway embrace. You've already begun this relationship, and I'm so glad and so happy about that, that has happened. This is celebrating my words there, I know. But anyway, there's that, and I want to welcome you to this watershed moment in your life. And I don't want to exaggerate that so that you feel, oh my God, I've got something. I need to have a Damascus-style enlightenment, even though I would not pour scorn on that at all. I would not welcome it, but just this little seed of something growing inside of us that is deeply, deeply transformative. And that's possible for each of us, and necessary for us as human beings. You're a human being. We're human beings. Very, very odd phenomena. Human beings. Very, very odd. Because we're very animal in so many ways. But then we have this kind of capacity to talk to each other and to speak and to have language and to have ideas, to have stories. It's something very exceptional. And this is a moment of human growth in that sense of the exceptionality of what it means to be a human being. So we are being invited into that during these next 2 days, an experience of human growth for your own sake, for my own sake, and for each other's sake. So just to tell you a little bit about myself before I start on the material, and we have a fair amount of material to get through, but my name is Tony Bartlett. I was a Roman Catholic priest for 11 years. I was ordained in 1973, which seems like the time of Jesus now, going back all that. It seems a really long time ago. Not quite Abraham, but, getting back there. And then I resigned in 1984 for all sorts of reasons. I did write a memoir, which I won't publicize, but that was a big element. That whole experience was very big for me and still is, because there's a lot about me which is still very much what you would call a priest. Whatever that means, whatever a priest means, whatever that name covers. I'm still that's what I am, that's what I do. In fact, I've worked out a style of life where I can do that. I can still do it, and I owe a lot to my wife, Linda, for that. And so we want to give her a big round of applause before we finish. Okay. But she's with me. And Linda and I have been the leaders of a community, a very small community of faith, study, and prayer for the last, shall we say, 25 years in Syracuse, New York, and we call that Bethany. It's the Bethany Center, and the full name is the Bethany Center for Nonviolent Theology and Spirituality, which really covers the waterfront. That's what we are, the Nonviolent Theology and Spirituality. And Mac and Dixie, who are right there, and Ruben, who is right back there, are online members of our community, which really developed because of COVID. And we've talked about that, how COVID was both a curse and a huge blessing, because it kind of splintered our existence to the middle of the United States, Michigan, and then the west coast of the United States, Los Angeles, Torrance. And the way we got in contact, there's different stories, but we do have a community that is national and international, because Sheila joins us every week as well from Australia. So our message goes out every week in terms of the study, and has been going out at least in this serious way for shall I say, well, since COVID for sure, but before that as well, for 10 years, shall we say. So that's who we are, and we have come en masse to intimidate you. So you feel there's something real and substantial here, and that I suppose in the past, if they were Americans coming, you would feel, oh, that must be great. Maybe not so much anymore. Maybe if you're not feeling there's a cultural cachet for people coming from America. But anyway, we are. That's where we're from. And actually, I am American. We became American about 12 years ago, I think it was. But anyway, that's who we are, and we join with you, and we're so pleased to do that in sharing this message. So without further ado, I will get to the nub of the matter, the material in which we're engaged. So I'm going to begin in this session describing what is known as mimetic theory. Now that's just a name which I don't want you to be put off by, because it's extremely human. Once we begin talking about it, you'll recognize it immediately for something that you do all the time and are doing right now, whether you know it or not. We are imitating each other in very powerful ways. And I will go through that, and then the next 5 sessions after that, I will be talking directly to the Bible, and then we will have a plenary at the end of tomorrow. So I begin with mimetic theory, and I'll begin by telling you a story I tell often, but it's very germane. I first read René Girard seriously in something like 1991. I was given his book, Things Hidden Since the Foundation of the World. That's his kind of major tome, as far as I'm concerned. It's actually composed of interviews. It's not a straightforward screed, and it's kind of like Plato and Socrates. It has that kind of ancient discursive style to it, almost dramatic, and it helps you to read it. But I was given that book in I think it was 87, when I was working in a homeless shelter in London, in London's East End, and in circumstances not unrecognizable within a city like Sydney, a big city, a big cosmopolitan city like Sydney, with a lot of poverty as well, individual poverty, abandonment, that kind of stuff. That's where I was working. And a friend from Italy gave me this book, and he'd picked it up in France in 1984, so it's going back, in a community dedicated to nonviolence in the south of France. Lanzo del Vasto was the leader of that community, and it was just one of these things that, like communities come and go. But at that time, Girard was all the rage in the south of France, or throughout France. He had published that book in 1978. And as the title suggests, Things Hidden Since the Foundation of the World, there's something here being disclosed, being communicated, which you didn't really know before. But somehow was also there in the world right from the very beginning. So actually it's a very exciting title, which he gets from the Gospel, which he gets from Matthew's Gospel. Jesus said, I will proclaim things hidden since the foundation of the world. So I had that book really on the back burner at that time, because I was so busy working. I was like David, running around like the proverbial, and I didn't have any time to read. But then when I left that work and we moved to Norfolk, which is a kind of very rural and very pleasant part of England to the north, about 100 miles north of London, and I began to read. And my wife had begun to train to be a nurse, which was very important because that actually got us into the United States ultimately. But she was training to be a nurse, and so I was looking after the kids. I was a house daddy. That's what I did for 2-3 years. But I had one day off a week to read, and a friend or a friend's wife came over to look after my little daughter, whose name is Susanna, while my son, Christopher, was actually beginning elementary school. So my children were off my hands and I could read, and my friend's wife had a little girl. She brought that girl with her. Her name was Holly. So there was Holly and Susanna, two little kids of about 3 or 4 out in the yard playing. And when my daughter Susanna, who kind of had the power in the situation because it was her home and the toys were hers, she would get into the little push car, the pedal car, and start pedaling it. And then Holly would yell out to her mum, "I want to play in that car! I want to play in that car!" And Susie, because she'd already been indoctrinated in Girard, said, "Okay." No, I'm kidding. I mean, but she was good enough, she gave up the car and she went and got on the tricycle. So a kind of minute went by, or 90 seconds went by, and Holly said, "The tricycle! I want to play on the tricycle." The car is no longer desirable. The car had lost all its glory, its allure, and the tricycle was the thing. So sure enough, Susie, who's actually a good little girl, really, I think she is and was, she got off the tricycle and then went on scooter. She started playing on the scooter. And what do you know, within 90 seconds, Holly says, "The scooter! I want to play on the scooter!" And then Susie went back to the car again. And the same thing happened I think by the end it was so obvious that this was not working that Holly's mother kind of took them somewhere else. But I was reading Girard exactly at the same time, and he was talking about mimetic desire. And it was playing out, absolutely, because what made the car valuable was not its intrinsic value, its worth, or mechanical power or whatever. It was the fact that Susie was using it. And that was proven by the fact that the moment Susie abandoned it and went to the to the tricycle, that became desirable and valuable. And of course, I'm sure you're always getting mental scenes now of scenes with children and with adults where this plays out. Except with adults, it's more nuanced and oblique. You can't see it directly, but it's happening all the time. We signal to each other what is desirable. And that was Girard's great big discovery. I mean, it's right there in front of you. And we think, well, it's children's behavior. No, it's human behavior. Because we are locked into each other neurologically and mentally. We don't know who we are. We can't be who we are unless you show me what to be and what to do and what's desirable. Now, Girard discovered this in the 1960s in his first book, a book called, in English, Deceit, Desire, and the Novel. And it's a review of 4 or 5 eminent novelists and writers. Shakespeare's not in there, but Shakespeare was definitely, who had the same insights, that in the stories by these people like Proust, Dostoevsky, Stendhal, these great prestigious writers from the 19th century, the writer would come to a point in their storytelling when they discovered that the ideal goal of the romantic hero or heroine, which they would be pursuing with all their being, with all their life, a romantic story. This is what I must get. I must attain this goal of some sort, or I must obtain the love of my beloved and get her or him to love me. And it's something that consumes me from within me. The writer, Proust, Dostoevsky, Stendhal, Shakespeare, they see that this desire that I have, that their hero has, their hero or heroine has, Flaubert's Madame Bovary, that this desire is not their own. It is mediated to them by somebody else. And he calls it the myth of spontaneous desire. The idea that I should spontaneously, out of my enormous selfhood, my kind of ideal godlike selfhood, should decide that this thing is something I want and I'm going to get it or whatever. No, I have to find out from somebody else what it is I want. And I do that by following their eyes, by following what they do, by following their eyes and most of all their hands, and of course their actions, their overall actions. And then I decide what I want. And he describes this in that book, Deceit, Desire, and the Novel. And that he says the moment in which the writer, the author, comes to understand that the hero's desire is mediated, it is not spontaneous, it comes from somebody else, is a moment of what he calls novelistic conversion. So he uses that language, which is a means of giving up this enormous kind of autonomy which we claim for ourselves. And the writer and the novelist would claim for themselves that there is this godlike romantic hero. No, I'm completely dependent on somebody else and on a social scene. Most of them, in Proust, he describes these acutely sophisticated social scenes which everybody wants to gain the approval of somebody who sits on the top of it, and be recognized as part of the social hierarchy, that this is all coming from somebody else. So it's a moment where you get downgraded very seriously as an autonomous hero, or the writer does, and recognize, and it's in Shakespeare in Midsummer Night's Dream, where Helena says a thing, oh hell, to learn love by somebody else's eyes. What hell it is to learn love by somebody else's eyes. A phrase something like that. She understands because of all the convolutions of the plot of Midsummer Night's Dream. But Shakespeare's on it all the time. He knows that we copy each other, according to Gerard anyway. So that was Gerard's huge breakthrough. It was a matter of literary criticism. He starts as a literary critic. But it immediately advances, the literary criticism advances an anthropological theory. It's about how human beings are. And at that time, because it just seemed to be on the level of literary theory, that he was actually had quite a lot of success. He was applauded for that book. But what happens, I can ask you, what happens when I learn from either of you or you learn from each other what it is that you want? And then you isolate something and say, yeah, that's the thing I want. What is likely to occur at that moment? Say there's a cup of coffee on the table, which I haven't had coffee this morning yet, but there's a cup of coffee on the table, and one person looks at, of course, coffee, I mean, that confuses the argument a little bit, but it has this physiological effect, but still, someone wants that coffee, and they're walking towards it, and I want that coffee. What's going to happen? Come on, tell me. There's going to be conflict. Mediated mimetic desire is inherently likely to lead to conflict. If we're not programmed to want this thing and then to want it in some kind of series or want different things, and therefore, like plants on a piece of garden, they'll all grow up independent even though we know that they do communicate, but still, let's say they're isolated themselves. No, we're not isolated like trees in a wood. We are intensely involved with each other. And we don't know what it is to be myself until someone else tells me what it is I want. And so the likelihood of conflict is built in to our very being. We are like nuclear fissile material, inherently unstable when we're together. We're very dangerous. You're dangerous. I'm dangerous. We're all very dangerous. But we don't seem that way. What has intervened to make us look less dangerous? Well, we call that culture. We call that law, prohibitions in Girard's language, story, which tells us the ideals, the goal, the correct way to behave. It would link to prohibitions, and ritual. But these are the three pillars of culture, as he calls it: ritual, story, and prohibitions. That's what's intervened. But how has that come about? So this is where Girard, advances to his next stage of thought, and it flows automatically from that first discovery. Now, incidentally, before I go on to that next stage of thought, in something like 1992 or 93, in a neurological research laboratory in Parma, Italy, they discovered something called mirror neurons. And they discovered that these monkeys, macaque monkeys, who were wired up, they had electrodes on their scalps in the area of brain activity. And they were mapping the scientists were mapping their motor neuron responses. So if they should raise their arm, this particular electrode, and it's handy to have a bald head so you can see where the electrode would go. This electrode would fire. And that's, of course, standard neurophysics. But one day, and this is the story, this actually happened. One of the researchers, and they said that it was so exciting, they couldn't recreate the notes exactly. They didn't have the exact sequence of events. It all happened so quickly. They had to recreate it. They weren't certain of those sequence of events. But some researcher went in, and he was literally snacking on peanuts. And then one of the electrodes, this is poor little macaque monkey all wired up, one of the electrodes fires for his hand. How can that be? He's supposed to be moving his hand. He's supposed to be sending the signal from his brain, or his brain is supposed to be sending the signal for his hand to move. But he was immobile. He was just sat in his little cage. But the electrode was going off. And they repeated they went back and tried to recreate it, and sure enough, the hand movements, and especially movements of the hand transferring food to the mouth on the part of the researcher, would fire electrons in the brains of the monkeys. So these are creatures who have something, I don't know, they have a quarter of at least less than a quarter of the cubic capacity of brain size that we have. We have many, many more of those neurons to fire, and they do fire. But the point is, this is hard science, this is technical science, showing the fact of imitation at the level of desire, and because it was to do with food, it was to do with reaching out for something that would be good for the little creature in the animal kingdom, and there's a host of literature out there now. So Girard had discovered that by reading literature. So that's an amazing thing, and then we'll come back to that. I'll come back to that a lot tomorrow night. That this literature, and biblically influenced literature, because that's why he calls it conversion, and that's another part of building up the picture that there's something about the Bible which has revealed this stuff, that we're not just closed down in a sacred order, which is actually a false order to who we really are, which is these little mimetic creatures learning from each other all the time what to desire and therefore going to war all the time, which is then mythologized, of course. But this is now a rising wave of understanding and research in our world today about who we are as human beings. And Girard has advanced that thought so that what was the power of Freudian psychology, shall we say, in the 60s and 70s, when the whole idea of the Oedipal complex and all that, and the child wanting, the son wanting the father's wife, and the Oedipal complex, all that kind of stuff, his mother, which was so powerful. I don't know if you remember that, but it was extremely powerful back in the 60s and 70s. He has displaced that, and displaced it very effectively with mimetic theory. That is, that the most fundamental level is not sexual. It's not sexual desire, it's mimetic desire. It could be anything that you want, that I want. It's not necessarily the object of sexual relationship, which was the case with Freud. So so what I'm talking about now is a huge cultural development and moment that we're in. It's this kind of watershed moment I'm talking about. But it's not so popular because talking about violence is not, I mean, watching violence on a movie, but talking about it in a kind of like therapeutic way, shall we say, is not so popular as talking about sex. Violence is something that is given, it has to happen, or we watch it on the movies. But sex is something we're all engaged in, we all belong to it, and we recognize it, and we like to talk about it, and Freud discovered that. But this is talking about violence. This is talking about something that lies deeper because of the character of shared desire. That I don't know what to desire until you show me. I don't know even who I am until you show me. And this is what he's saying, and he calls it the interdivviduality of the human being. The individual is not an individual to themselves, isolated, godlike, autonomous. We are interdivvidual. We belong to each other. So culture comes along, and so how am I doing for time here? I'm okay. I'm okay. So culture comes along and it inserts this layer of prohibition. You will not go over that line over there because that's where the women live, and you have to live in the male part, or vice versa. You won't walk on this road because that's where the young girls walk, and the young men have to walk over here. That's rigid divisions, and this is all recorded ethnographically. You can see all these practices, many practices like that. And then the stories of heroes and heroes who were killed, people who died in mysterious circumstances, which Girard derived an awful lot from. And then the ritual, which very quickly, throughout the world, moves to sacrifice. So Girard's next book, Violence and the Sacred, really began with the phenomenon of sacrifice, about how so many cultures use sacrifice and its very beneficial effects, that is, you're actually killing a living being. And we just do it automatically. I mean, we still do it. I mean, different religions and cultures sacrifice all the time. I mean, meat eating is something that is derived from sacrifice, I think, historically. And so we're doing that all the time. And we just take it as absolutely natural, something that occurs all the time. We don't reflect on it. But he began to reflect on it, and he saw that it was in the circumstances of the development, or he speculated, he hypothesized, that you have these early primates, that is, early human beings, early human beings, primates, hominids, kind of at the border between the primate kingdom and Homo sapiens, they would have developed their cerebral capacity progressively. So they just become smarter and smarter. You know where you go to the zoo and do something, the monkey will imitate you. I mean, I don't specify the actual individual monkey, but the actual species. But I did this. I went to the monkey, and he did exactly the same thing. He scratched his head back, and I proved it to myself. Monkey see, monkey do. This imitative ability. And my dog, I'm sure your own animals, they don't. Well, she liked pizza. She didn't like her own food. Why did she like pizza? It's because we like pizza. We ate pizza. I'm sure that's the case. I mean, it wasn't intrinsically better than her food. Her food was expensive, but she much prefers pizza, and she would steal it off the table. So she was mimetic as well, even though she didn't have that developed brain. And then when you get to a human being, which has something like 1,800 cubic centimeters of brain matter, we're enormously mimetic. That's why we're smart. That's why we can learn languages, why we can learn the piano, we can do all sorts of wonderful things. Some people are incredible, what things they can do in dance moves, in singing, in science, and learning mathematics, all those, this capacity that we have. So what was it that controlled this exponential growth of imitative ability? It was the single victim, or as Gerard calls it, the surrogate victim. So when, say, you and I are conflicting over a cup of coffee, we get into conflict, and we have no rules, we have no laws. I mean, we're primates. Very quickly, others can see we're fighting. And they know by the fact that we're fighting, if you'll pardon me, we would never fight. You look far too nice for me to fight with you. But others can see that we're conflicted. And they're attracted by the very fact that we're fighting. Because they know that there's something desirable. We wouldn't be fighting unless there's something desirable there. So before we know it, everybody's fighting everybody else. He calls it the war of all against all. It's Thomas Hobbes' war against all. Very easy, it can easily break out. And so the result of that would be we would destroy each other very quickly. The primal group would destroy each other very, very quickly. Because what would the restraint be? He says the restraint is the first individual in that group that is now experiencing the war of all against all to fall or show themselves somehow different. They may not even join in because they don't have that same mimetic response. Everybody will pick on them because they're the weakest, the most vulnerable, and all the violence will discharge on that person, on that individual. And it's what he calls the surrogate victim or the scapegoat. The scapegoat is the way in which the immensely dysfunctional possibility of mimesis and imitation within this super mimetic creature that is human being, the way that is resolved. It goes on one individual and we kill that. The primal group will kill that individual. And as people say, you can't get back to that original situation. Of course we can't get back. We can't observe it. But we observe it all the time in our own lives. How one individual is scapegoated, is picked on, is attacked, and becomes the one who is blamed. It's very easy, very quickly, and we know how that works in politics. In sport, in all areas, that you give the blame in one direction, and everybody mobilizes very quickly. It's something that is automatic to us, and there's lots of money and lots of power to be built on that. And so he says that sacrifice is actually rooted in scapegoating. It is a human practice, and it's what's enabled us to develop culture, develop those stories, develop the prohibitions. The primary event of terror, where everybody attacks each other and then it's resolved by attacking one individual, becomes the birth of a new consciousness. He says the first non-instinctual awareness, so that we suddenly have an understanding, not understanding, but a sense that there's something else that is now determining our lives, not simply instinctual behaviors and restraints. That becomes the foundation of culture. So he moves from a literary theory to an anthropological theory and to a primary anthropology. It's a meta-anthropology. It's where we come from as human beings. And so it's very powerful and very controversial, as you could imagine. Controversial because it cuts across other discourses. And we won't get into that, but, you know, he battled. I knew Girard. He didn't have a particularly easy academic career. You know, there was a lot of opposition, especially in the American Academy of Religion, where he used to attend every year, and I went to a number. And of course, you know, this is a theory that goes, it's a global theory, it goes underneath so many other specialties. It wasn't popular, but it does explain this enormous capacity we have for picking on each other, for indicating the enemy, for saying who the enemy is, and mobilizing against that entity, whatever it is, and doing so automatically so we don't even think about it. You know, and if you don't join in, there's something wrong with you. You're a traitor. You're not a proper person, not a proper Australian or English person or American, you know. Salute the flag, all that stuff. It explains so much, and it comes at a moment of this, as we all know, this growing crisis of human existence that we're in, where we now have weaponry that can extinguish life on Earth. There's a kind of symmetry between this understanding, this very powerfully deep understanding, this meta-understanding of what it means to be a human being, and the terminal violence, which we've come to technically and mechanically as a species. You know, it's not an accident. There's something been growing, and of course we could talk about that, how violent culture or culture rooted in violence redoubles itself to try to get away from understanding this basic human construction that we have that has been going since really Shakespeare, you know, like, and is Girard would argue, and we're going to get into it in the next sessions, it revealed actually in the crucifixion of Christ, in the Bible, the stories like Joseph and his brothers, Cain and Abel, that kind of stuff. But there is this revelatory power in the biblical story that has brought all this to the surface, and then the culture and great writers will pick it up. And now we are faced by it as human beings. So this is not an easy moment to be a human being. And we'll use any way to deflect it, to deflect the challenge that we're facing. You know, we'll try to blame somebody or other. You know, we'll try, as Girard says, the only way you could be violent today is against the violent ones. You know, the only ones you could be the only way you can make a victim of somebody is if that person, you can prove that person is made a victim. You know, that person is a victimizer, you can victimize the victimizer. That's legitimate, because we now have the victimizer revealed to us, and so they're the people to really go at and go and legitimately crucify. But it's still the same behavior. So we're at this intensely, as I say, watershed moment in what it means to be a human being. And it's to your credit this morning, you guys, to turn up here and submit it to intelligent reflection.
We're all just imitating.
That too, but that's a good thing to imitate. So I think it's right time. Thank you. So that's mimetic theory. I mean, there's a lot encompassed there. I want to bring in a lot of stuff. There's his first book, Deceit, Desire, and the Novel, and then his second book, Violence and the Sacred, which I described in terms of sacrifice, with the rootedness of human beings in sacrifice. Why do we kill animals in sacrifice? No one's ever thought about it. And in fact, when I studied religion, they said it's a mystery no one will ever resolve. That's what they said, because they didn't really want to resolve it, you know. So that's what I've described to you. And we will get then into the third level, the third stage of his thinking, which is the biblical stage, coming with the book I was telling you at the beginning, Things Hidden Since the Foundation of the World. But now we want to talk together, after a little break, about mimetic desire, about imitation, and about the violence that results from it.